I was sitting in the mahogany boardroom where I had built my empire for 32 years when my own son looked me in the eyes and said those words that would haunt me forever. "Mom, you're too old for this. Your services are no longer required." The same conference table where I had closed million-dollar deals, where I had fought tooth and nail to build Prescott Industries from a small consulting firm into a corporate giant, had just become the stage for my public humiliation. Can you imagine the shock of being discarded by the child you sacrificed everything for? The same hands that had changed his diapers, that had worked 18-hour days to pay for his Harvard MBA, were now being dismissed as incompetent and outdated. What would you do if your own flesh and blood stabbed you in the back after you had just handed them everything on a silver platter? I remained silent in that boardroom, surrounded by faces I had known for decades, some avoiding my gaze in shame, others smirking with barely concealed satisfaction. But what my arrogant son Michael didn't know was that while he was celebrating his corporate coup, I was already planning something that would change the fate of our family business forever. My name is Caroline Prescott. I am 58 years old, and until 24 hours ago, I was the CEO and founder of Prescott Industries, a management consulting firm valued at $200 million. I started this company in 1992 with nothing but a business degree, $5,000 in savings, and an unshakable determination to prove that a divorced mother could build something extraordinary. For 3 decades, I poured my soul into every contract, every client relationship, every strategic decision that transformed my small firm into one of the most respected consulting companies on the East Coast. Michael had been groomed for leadership since he graduated from Harvard 10 years ago. I brought him in as vice president of operations, taught him everything I knew about the business, introduced him to every major client personally. I watched with pride as he developed his own leadership style, as he brought fresh ideas and modern technology to our operations. He was smart, charismatic, and had that natural business instinct that I recognized because it reminded me of myself at his age. The transition had been my idea. At 58, I was ready to step back, to let the next generation take the reins while I remained as chairman of the board, providing guidance and wisdom when needed. It seemed like the perfect succession plan. Michael would become CEO, I would retain my dignity and influence, and the Prescott legacy would continue to flourish under family leadership. The signing ceremony had been beautiful. Just Michael, myself, and our family lawyer, Thomas Henderson, who had been handling our corporate affairs for 15 years. I signed the papers that officially transferred the CEO position to my son, feeling a mixture of pride and nostalgia as I watched him sign his name next to mine. He hugged me afterward, telling me how grateful he was for everything I had built, how he would honor the Prescott name and make me proud. "Mom, this company is going to reach heights you never imagined," he had said, his eyes bright with ambition. "We're going to take everything you built and multiply it by 10. I went home that night feeling accomplished, thinking about the golf lessons I could finally take, the travel I had postponed for decades, the books I wanted to read. For the first time in 32 years, I fell asleep without thinking about quarterly reports or client presentations. I was finally free to enjoy the fruits of my labor. The next morning, I arrived at the office at 8:30, as I had done for 3 decades. My assistant, Jennifer, looked uncomfortable when she saw me. "Mrs. Prescott," she said hesitantly. "Mr. Michael called an emergency shareholders meeting for 9 o'clock. He said you didn't need to attend." Something cold settled in my stomach. In 32 years of running Prescott Industries, I had never been excluded from a shareholders meeting. Ever. "Jennifer, please prepare the conference room. I'll be attending." "But Mrs. Prescott," he was very specific. "Jennifer," I said firmly, "I am still chairman of the board. Prepare the conference room." When I walked into that boardroom, the conversation stopped abruptly. Michael was standing at the head of the table, my old position, wearing the navy suit I had bought him for his Harvard graduation. The other board members were there: Patricia Williams from our accounting department, Robert Chen, our chief financial officer, and 3 external investors who held minority stakes in the company. Michael's face flushed when he saw me. "Mom, I thought I made it clear that you didn't need to be here." "This is still my company, Michael," I replied calmly, taking my seat. "I'm here as chairman of the board. What happened next will stay with me until my dying day." My own son, the boy I had sacrificed my personal life to raise and educate, stood in front of people who had known me for decades and systematically destroyed my reputation. He presented a slideshow titled Restructuring for the Future that painted me as an outdated leader whose traditional methods were holding the company back. The business world has changed dramatically, he said, clicking through slides that showed declining growth rates over the past 2 years. We need fresh leadership, modern strategies, and frankly, someone who understands the current market dynamics. Each slide felt like a knife to my chest. He criticized my client retention strategies, called my financial management overly conservative, and suggested that my maternal management style was incompatible with the aggressive growth the company needed. But the worst was yet to come. Therefore, Michael announced, I am proposing that Caroline Prescott be relieved of all operational duties, including her position as chairman of the board. The company needs to move forward without the burden of outdated leadership. The silence in the room was deafening. Patricia Williams was staring at her hands. Robert Chen looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. The external investors were nodding approvingly, probably thinking about how a younger CEO might increase their returns. That's when he said it. Those words that cut deeper than any business criticism could. Mom, you're too old for this. Your services are no longer required. The vote was swift and brutal. 5 in favor, 2 abstentions. Just like that, I was stripped of every position in the company I had built with my own hands. As I gathered my things and walked toward the door, Michael called after me. Mom, this isn't personal. It's just business. You'll understand when you've had time to think about it. I turned around and looked at him one last time. You're right, Michael. This is just business, and you're about to learn a very expensive lesson about the family business. I walked out of that boardroom with my head held high, carrying my leather briefcase and 32 years of memories. But what my arrogant, ungrateful son didn't realize was that while he had been planning his corporate coup, I had been protecting my life's work in ways he couldn't even imagine. You see, Michael made one crucial mistake in his rush to push me out. He assumed that signing CEO transition papers meant I had transferred control of the company itself. But there's a difference between operational leadership and ownership control, and that difference was about to destroy his perfect little plan. Because what Michael didn't know, what he had been too arrogant to verify before humiliating me in front of our board, was that I still controlled 78% of Prescott Industries shares. And when he discovered this truth, it would already be too late to undo the damage he had just done to our family. As I drove home that morning, my phone was already ringing. My lawyer, my accountant, my most trusted allies were about to learn exactly what my ungrateful son had just done. And then, Michael Prescott was going to discover what happens when you betray the woman who built everything he was now trying to steal. The war was just beginning. The first person I called was Thomas Henderson, my lawyer. Not just because he had handled the transition papers the day before, but because Thomas had been more than my legal counsel for 15 years. He had been my strategic advisor through every major decision that built Prescott Industries into what it was today. Caroline? Thomas answered on the second ring, his voice immediately concerned. I just heard from Patricia Williams. She called me 10 minutes ago, practically in tears. She said Michael fired you in a board meeting this morning. Tell me she got the story wrong. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage of my own building, still processing what had just happened. She didn't get it wrong, Thomas. My son just staged a corporate coup and threw me out of my own company. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. Then Thomas said something that sent a chill down my spine. Caroline, we need to talk. Immediately. There are things about yesterday's paperwork that we need to discuss urgently. What kind of things? Not over the phone. Can you come to my office right now? Thomas Henderson's law firm occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown building that overlooked the harbor. I had been in his office hundreds of times over the years, but today it felt different. Today I wasn't the powerful CEO seeking legal advice. I was a betrayed mother trying to understand how her own son had orchestrated her downfall. Thomas was waiting for me with a thick manila folder spread across his mahogany desk. His usually impeccable gray hair looked disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it. Caroline, sit down. We have a serious problem. More serious than my son firing me from my own company? Much more serious. He pulled out a document I recognized, the transition papers we had signed yesterday. Look at this carefully. Look at what Michael actually had you sign. As I read through the document, my blood turned to ice. What I thought was a simple CEO transition agreement was actually much more comprehensive. Michael had buried several clauses in the legal language that I had trusted him enough not to scrutinize completely. Thomas, this document, it transfers more than just the CEO position. That's right. If you look at Section 4, subsection C, Michael included language that transfers all operational control and fiduciary responsibility to him. He's trying to argue that this gives him authority to make any decision he deems necessary for the company's welfare, including restructuring the board and removing officers. My hands were trembling as I held the paper. But that doesn't change my share ownership, right? I still control 78% of the company. Thomas leaned back in his chair, and I could see the worry in his eyes. That's where it gets complicated, Caroline. Michael is smart. He's not claiming ownership of your shares. He's claiming operational authority over them. He's arguing that as CEO with complete operational control, he has the right to vote your shares in matters of corporate governance. The room started spinning. That's impossible. Those are my shares. I earned them. I bought them. They're in my name. They are in your name, but Thomas pulled out another document. Yesterday, after you left, Michael filed papers with the state declaring his intention to exercise full operational control over all company assets, including voting rights on all shares, based on the authority granted in your transition agreement. I felt like I was drowning. Can he do that? It's legally questionable. But Caroline, here's the real problem. By the time we fight this in court and win, Michael could have already sold the company, transferred assets, or made decisions that would be impossible to reverse. He's moving fast, and he's clearly had legal advice on how to exploit the language in this agreement. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the harbor where I used to bring Michael as a child to watch the boats. How had that sweet little boy who used to hold my hand and tell me he wanted to be just like me when he grew up turned into someone who could orchestrate such a calculated betrayal? There's more, Caroline. Thomas's voice was gentle, but firm. I made some calls after Patricia contacted me. Michael has scheduled another board meeting for tomorrow morning. Word is he's planning to propose selling Prescott Industries to Blackstone Consulting Group. I spun around. Blackstone? They're our biggest competitor. They've been trying to acquire us for 5 years, and they've offered $250 million. Michael would walk away with a fortune, and you, well, with the legal challenges he's mounting regarding your operational authority, you might end up tied up in courts for years while he liquidates everything you built. The magnitude of Michael's betrayal was becoming clear. This wasn't just about pushing me out of day-to-day operations. This was about stealing my life's work entirely and selling it to the highest bidder. My own son was planning to destroy 32 years of my blood, sweat, and tears for a quick profit. But then something shifted inside me. The shock and hurt began transforming into something else, something cold and calculating. I had not survived 3 decades in the cutthroat world of corporate consulting by being weak or naive. I had built Prescott Industries by being smarter, tougher, and more strategic than every competitor who had tried to destroy me. Thomas, I said, my voice steady for the first time since walking into his office, I need you to listen very carefully. Michael thinks he's playing chess, but he doesn't know who he's playing against. Caroline, I understand you're angry, but we need to be realistic about... No. I walked back to his desk and placed both hands on the polished wood surface. Michael made 3 critical mistakes. First, he underestimated how much I know about every aspect of this business. Second, he assumed that signing papers yesterday meant I transferred all my power to him. And third, he forgot that I didn't build a $200 million company by being stupid. Thomas looked at me with a mixture of concern and curiosity. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that my ungrateful son is about to discover that I've been protecting this company and my interests in ways he never imagined. And I'm thinking that by tomorrow morning, Michael Prescott is going to wish he had treated his mother with a little more respect. I opened my purse and pulled out my phone. First, I need you to file an emergency injunction to prevent any sale of company assets pending resolution of the ownership dispute. Can you have that done by end of business today? Yes, but Caroline. Second, I need you to schedule a meeting with Judge Margaret Foster. She owes me a favor from when I helped her daughter get into Stanford Business School. We need to fast-track this case. Caroline, what aren't you telling me? I smiled for the first time since walking out of that boardroom. Thomas, you've been my lawyer for 15 years, but there are some aspects of my business affairs that I've kept private. Not because I didn't trust you, but because a smart woman always keeps some cards close to her chest. I walked toward his office door, then turned back. Call Patricia Williams and Robert Chen. Tell them I'm requesting an emergency board meeting for Friday morning. And Thomas? Make sure Michael knows that his mother will be attending as the majority shareholder of Prescott Industries. But how can you be majority shareholder if he's claiming operational control over your shares? Because, my dear Thomas, Michael only knows about the 78% of shares that are registered in the corporate documents he's seen. What he doesn't know about are the additional 15% I've been quietly acquiring through shell companies over the past 5 years. Thomas's mouth dropped open. You own 93% of Prescott Industries? I own 93% of Prescott Industries. And tomorrow, my son is going to learn that when you try to steal from Caroline Prescott, you better make sure you actually understand what you're trying to steal. As I left Thomas's office, I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Michael thought he was dealing with a tired old woman who would quietly accept her dismissal and fade into retirement. Instead, he had just awakened something in me that had been dormant for too long, the same ruthless business instinct that had built an empire from nothing. The boy who had once sat in my lap and asked me to teach him about business was about to get the most expensive education of his life. And the lesson was going to be simple. You never, ever betray the woman who gave you everything. My phone was already ringing as I walked to my car. Patricia Williams' name appeared on the screen, and I could imagine the panic in the office as word spread about the emergency injunction that was about to freeze all of Michael's plans. But this was just the beginning. Michael wanted to play hardball with his mother? Fine. He was about to discover that I had been playing this game since before he was born, and I had never lost a battle that truly mattered to me. The war for Prescott Industries was about to begin in earnest. By Thursday morning, my kitchen table looked like a war room. 32 years of corporate documents, financial records, and legal papers were spread across every surface. But this wasn't just about gathering ammunition. This was about uncovering the full scope of what my son had been planning behind my back. The first shocking discovery came from my accountant, Margaret Chen, Robert's wife, and the woman who had been handling my personal finances for 12 years. She arrived at my house at 7 a.m. with a laptop and a very grim expression. Caroline, I've been analyzing the company's financial records from the past 6 months, Margaret said, opening spreadsheets that made my blood run cold. Michael hasn't just been preparing to push you out. He's been systematically preparing to gut the company. The numbers told a story of calculated betrayal. Michael had been quietly liquidating assets, transferring funds to offshore accounts, and restructuring contracts in ways that would maximize immediate cash flow while destroying long-term client relationships. Look at this, Margaret pointed to a series of transactions. He's been selling our proprietary client data to third parties, companies that we've worked with for decades, their strategic information, their vulnerabilities. Michael has been selling it all. I felt sick. That's not just unethical. It's criminal. It gets worse. He's also been shorting our stock through dummy corporations. He's been betting against his own company's success while simultaneously working to destroy it from the inside. But the discovery that truly staggered me came when Patricia Williams knocked on my door at 10 o'clock that morning. Patricia had been with Prescott Industries for 8 years, and she had always been loyal, discreet, and absolutely trustworthy. Today, she looked terrified. Mrs. Prescott, I need to tell you something that's been eating at me for months, she said, accepting the coffee I offered with trembling hands. Michael made me sign a non-disclosure agreement, but after what happened yesterday, I can't stay silent anymore. What kind of non-disclosure agreement? About the Blackstone meetings. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. What Blackstone meetings? Patricia took a deep breath. Michael has been meeting with Blackstone executives for 4 months. Not just casual conversations, formal acquisition discussions. He's been providing them with detailed financial information, client lists, proprietary methodologies, everything they would need to determine an acquisition price. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. Patricia, are you telling me that Michael has been planning to sell the company since before I agreed to the transition? Yes. And Mrs. Prescott, there's something else. The reason he was so eager to get you to sign those papers wasn't just about becoming CEO. Blackstone made it clear that they wouldn't acquire the company with you still involved. They wanted a clean transition with no legacy leadership complications. I set down my coffee and stared at Patricia. My own son has been plotting to eliminate me from my own company for months. I'm sorry, Mrs. Prescott. I should have told you sooner. But Michael said if anyone interfered with the acquisition, he would make sure they never worked in consulting again. That afternoon, I made a call that would change everything. Dr. James Morrison had been my business mentor 20 years ago when I was struggling to grow Prescott Industries, from a small firm into a major player. Now he was the most respected corporate consultant on the East Coast, and he owed me several favors from deals I had referred to him over the years. Caroline, I heard about what happened, James said when I reached him. Half the business community is talking about how Michael Prescott forced his mother out of her own company. People are shocked. James, I need your help, not just as a friend, but as someone who understands how corporate warfare really works. What do you need? I need to know everything about Blackstone's acquisition strategy. I need to know their weaknesses, their financial vulnerabilities, their dirty secrets, and I need to know it by tomorrow morning. James was quiet for a moment. Caroline, are you planning what I think you're planning? I'm planning to show my son that when you declare war on Caroline Prescott, you better be prepared for total war. That evening, as I reviewed everything I had discovered, the full picture of Michael's betrayal became crystal clear. This had never been about modernizing the company or bringing fresh leadership. This had been a calculated plan to steal everything I had built and sell it to our biggest competitor, eliminating me as a threat while maximizing his personal profit. But Michael had made one fatal error in his scheming. He had assumed that I would be too shocked, too hurt, too old to fight back effectively. Instead, he had just awakened the most dangerous enemy he could possibly imagine. A woman who had nothing left to lose and 32 years of strategic expertise to guide her revenge. Tomorrow's board meeting was going to be very different from what my arrogant son was expecting. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that used to energize me for important business meetings. But this wasn't just any meeting. This was the day I would begin dismantling my son's carefully constructed betrayal, piece by piece. Dr. James Morrison had delivered on his promise. The dossier he provided about Blackstone Consulting Group was devastating. Not only were they planning to acquire Prescott Industries at below market value, but they had a history of stripping acquired companies for parts, firing 90% of existing staff, and selling off assets within 6 months. More importantly, James had uncovered something that would prove crucial. Blackstone was leveraged to the breaking point. They were financing this acquisition through high-risk loans that would cripple them financially if the deal fell through at the last minute. But the real game-changer came from an unexpected source. At 8:30 that morning, 30 minutes before the board meeting, my assistant Jennifer called with news that made my heart race. Mrs. Prescott, there are 3 men in expensive suits in the lobby asking to speak with you. They said they represent the Hartwell Group. The Hartwell Group. I hadn't heard that name in 5 years, but I remembered them well. They were a private equity firm that had tried to acquire Prescott Industries back in 2019. I had turned them down because their offer, while generous, would have meant losing control of my company's direction and values. Send them up to conference room B, I told Jennifer. I'll meet them there in 5 minutes. The 3 men waiting for me represented more than just another potential buyer. They represented leverage I hadn't expected to have. The lead negotiator, David Hartwell himself, stood up when I entered the room. Mrs. Prescott, I hope you'll forgive the short notice, but we heard about yesterday's developments and wanted to make you an offer. I'm listening. David opened a leather portfolio and slid a document across the table. $300 million for Prescott Industries. Cash, closing within 30 days. And here's the key difference from our previous discussions. You would remain as chairman and senior strategic advisor for a minimum of 5 years, with full authority over company culture and client relationships. I stared at the number. $300 million was $50 million more than Blackstone's offer, and the terms preserved everything I cared about regarding my company's legacy. There's one condition, David continued. This offer is contingent on you maintaining operational control of the company. If ownership or decision-making authority has been compromised, we'd need to renegotiate significantly lower terms. I smiled. Gentlemen, I think you're going to be very pleased with today's board meeting. At exactly 9 o'clock, I walked into the boardroom that had been my domain for 3 decades. Michael was already there, wearing another one of his expensive suits and that smug expression that I was beginning to hate. The other board members were seated around the table. Patricia Williams, Robert Chen, and the 3 external investors who had voted to remove me just 3 days earlier. Michael looked surprised to see me. Mom, I thought I made it clear that you're no longer welcome at board meetings. Actually, Michael, I said, taking my seat at the head of the table, as the majority shareholder of this company, I'm not just welcome. I'm in charge. Michael laughed. Mom, we've been through this. The transition papers you signed give me operational control over all company decisions, including voting rights on shares. I opened my briefcase and placed a thick legal document on the table. Thomas Henderson's emergency injunction, filed yesterday and approved this morning by Judge Margaret Foster. All asset transfers, sales negotiations, and operational decisions are frozen pending resolution of ownership disputes. The color drained from Michael's face. You can't do that. I already did, but that's just the beginning. I placed a second document on the table. Share ownership verification, updated as of this morning. It turns out I control 93% of Prescott Industries, not the 78% you thought you were manipulating. The silence in the room was absolute. Even Patricia, who knew I was planning something, looked shocked by the actual numbers. Michael's voice was barely a whisper. That's impossible. Shell companies, Michael. 5 years of quietly acquiring additional shares whenever they became available. Something you would have discovered if you had done proper due diligence before attempting your coup. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard where Michael had presented his case against me 3 days earlier. But the real question is, what happens now? Because you see, Michael, I have some very interesting information about your activities over the past 4 months. I began writing on the whiteboard. Blackstone meetings, asset liquidation, client data sales, stock manipulation. With each item I wrote, Michael's face grew paler. You've been plotting to destroy this company for months, haven't you, son? Not improve it, not modernize it, destroy it. Sell it for parts to our biggest competitor and walk away with millions while firing every person in this room who trusted you. Robert Chen spoke for the first time. Michael, is this true? Michael's composure finally cracked. You don't understand the pressures of modern business. The market has changed. We needed to adapt or die. Adapt? I laughed bitterly. You call selling our clients' confidential information to third parties adaptation? You call betting against your own company's success adaptation? I placed one final document on the table. Purchase offer from the Hartwell Group. $300 million. $50 million more than your Blackstone deal, with terms that preserve this company's integrity and protect every job in this building. The external investors were suddenly very interested. $300 million was significantly more than they had been expecting from any sale. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. Michael, you have 2 choices. You can resign immediately as CEO, accept a generous severance package, and leave quietly. Or you can try to fight me in court, where all of your illegal activities will become public record, and you'll likely face criminal charges for corporate fraud and theft of trade secrets. Michael was staring at the table, his hands trembling slightly. The golden boy who had humiliated me 3 days ago was gone, replaced by a frightened young man who had just realized he had been outmaneuvered by the woman he had underestimated. Patricia, I said, please call security to escort Michael from the building. His access to all company systems should be terminated immediately. As security arrived to escort my son out, he turned to look at me one last time. Mom, you don't understand. I was trying to secure our family's future. No, Michael, I replied quietly. You were trying to steal my life's work. There's a difference. After Michael left, I addressed the remaining board members. Ladies and gentlemen, Prescott Industries will continue to operate under my leadership until we complete the Hartwell acquisition. Every employee will keep their job. Every client relationship will be honored, and every person who remained loyal to this company during the past 3 days will be rewarded accordingly." As the board meeting concluded and people began filing out, Patricia Williams approached me. "Mrs. Prescott, how long have you been planning this?" "Patricia, I wasn't planning anything until Wednesday morning when my son betrayed me. But you see, I've been protecting myself and this company for 32 years. Michael thought he was playing a game, but he didn't realize that I wrote the rules." Walking out of that boardroom, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the pure satisfaction of a battle won through intelligence, preparation, and strategic thinking. Michael had taught me an important lesson about trust, but I had taught him a much more expensive lesson about respect. The war wasn't over yet, but the first major victory was mine. The weekend after Michael's removal was the most productive 48 hours I had experienced in years. While my son was presumably nursing his wounds and consulting his own lawyers, I was orchestrating the most important business maneuver of my career. Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor to my home. Thomas Henderson arrived with coffee and croissants, but more importantly, with news that would accelerate my timeline significantly. "Caroline, Michael isn't going down quietly," Thomas said, settling into my kitchen chair with a concerned expression. "He's hired Blackstone's legal team, and they're planning a multi-pronged attack. They're claiming that your shell company acquisitions constitute securities fraud, that you manipulated share prices, and that the emergency injunction should be overturned." I poured myself coffee and considered this development. How long do we have before they can mount a serious legal challenge? 2 weeks, maybe 3 if we're lucky. But Caroline, there's something else. Michael has been contacting our major clients directly, telling them that the company is in legal chaos and suggesting they might want to consider switching to alternative providers. Alternative providers meaning Blackstone. Exactly. He's trying to destroy the company's value before you can complete the Hartwell deal. This was Michael's final gambit. If he couldn't steal the company, he would try to destroy it out of spite. But what my son didn't realize was that he had just made the same mistake twice, underestimating his mother's preparedness. "Thomas, I need you to do 3 things immediately. First, schedule a conference call with all major clients for Monday morning. Second, prepare a comprehensive legal response to every claim Michael and Blackstone are likely to make. Third, expedite the Hartwell acquisition timeline. I want this deal closed in 10 days, not 30. Caroline, 10 days is nearly impossible for a transaction this size. Then we make the impossible happen." Sunday afternoon, I received a call that would prove crucial to everything that followed. Dr. James Morrison had been working his network of contacts throughout the weekend, and what he discovered about Blackstone's financial situation was even worse than we had initially suspected. "Caroline, Blackstone is hemorrhaging money," James explained during our call. "They've been using acquisition promises to secure bridge loans, but if the Prescott deal falls through, they'll default on over $100 million in debt obligations." "How certain are you about this information?" "Completely certain. I have contacts at 3 different banks that are carrying their debt. Blackstone needs your company not just for growth, but for survival. Without this acquisition, they'll likely face bankruptcy within 6 months." This intelligence changed everything. Michael wasn't just trying to sell the company. He was trying to save Blackstone from financial collapse, probably in exchange for a massive personal payout and a guaranteed executive position in the merged entity. Monday morning's client conference call was a masterpiece of corporate communication. I had spent Sunday evening personally calling the CEOs of our 12 largest clients, people I had worked with for years, sometimes decades. By the time we held the group call, I had already secured private commitments from 8 of them to remain with Prescott Industries, regardless of any transitional turbulence. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began the conference call, "I'm sure some of you have received concerning communications about Prescott Industries over the weekend. I want to address those concerns directly and transparently." I spent 20 minutes explaining the situation in terms that emphasized stability, continuity, and the strength of our client relationships. But the moment that sealed everyone's confidence came when I announced the Hartwell acquisition. The Hartwell Group has made a premium offer for Prescott Industries that will provide significant additional resources for serving your needs while maintaining all existing relationships and service standards. This acquisition represents growth and stability, not disruption. After the call, our largest client, Continental Manufacturing, requested a private conversation. Their CEO, Maria Santos, had been working with me for 15 years. Caroline, I have to ask directly, is your son trying to destroy the company out of revenge? Maria, Michael made some very poor decisions based on incomplete information, but those decisions will not impact our ability to serve your needs or honor our commitments. Good. Because Continental was prepared to terminate our contract if there was any uncertainty about your personal involvement going forward. You've saved our company millions over the years. We're not interested in working with anyone else. This conversation was repeated with client after client throughout Monday and Tuesday. Michael's sabotage campaign was not only failing, it was actually strengthening my position by forcing clients to choose sides, and they were overwhelmingly choosing to stay with the person they trusted. By Wednesday, the momentum had shifted completely in my favor. David Hartwell called with news that would make the final victory even sweeter. Caroline, we've completed our due diligence review, and frankly, we're even more impressed with what you've built than we were 5 years ago. We're prepared to accelerate the timeline and increase our offer to $320 million if we can close by Friday. What's driving the urgency? Honestly, we've been watching Blackstone's financial situation deteriorate for months. If they collapse, there's going to be a feeding frenzy in the consulting industry. We want Prescott Industries secured before that happens. Thursday afternoon brought the final piece of intelligence I needed. Margaret Chen had been quietly investigating Michael's personal finances, and what she discovered explained everything about his desperate alliance with Blackstone. Caroline, your son is in serious financial trouble, Margaret reported during our meeting. He's been living well beyond his means for years. The house, the cars, the country club memberships, it's all leveraged. He owes over $2 million in personal debts, and most of his assets are mortgaged to the maximum. So the Blackstone deal wasn't just about pushing me out. It was about saving himself from bankruptcy. Exactly. And based on the communication trail I've uncovered, Blackstone promised him a $5 million signing bonus plus a guaranteed executive salary of $750,000 per year. He was essentially selling your company to pay his personal debts. That evening, as I prepared for Friday's closing meeting with Hartwell, I reflected on how completely the situation had reversed in just 1 week. Michael had walked into that boardroom 7 days ago thinking he was executing a perfect plan to eliminate his mother and secure his own future. Instead, he had triggered a chain of events that would result in his permanent exile from the business world and my achieving the most profitable exit in Prescott Industries history. The boy who had once sat in my lap, asking me to teach him about business, was about to receive his final lesson. When you betray the person who gave you everything, you lose everything. Friday morning would bring the conclusion of this corporate war, and I intended to make sure that Michael understood exactly what his arrogance and greed had cost him. Friday morning arrived with an unexpected phone call that would make my victory even more complete than I had imagined. At 6:30, while I was reviewing final documents for the Hartwell closing, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Prescott? This is Detective Sarah Mitchell from the Corporate Fraud Division. We need to speak with you immediately about your son's business activities. My coffee grew cold as Detective Mitchell explained that the FBI had been investigating Blackstone Consulting Group for securities fraud for 8 months. Michael's data sales and stock manipulation activities had triggered federal attention, and now he was facing potential criminal charges that could result in 10 to 15 years in federal prison. Mrs. Prescott, we understand you've been the victim of corporate theft and fraud. We'd like your cooperation in building our case against both your son and Blackstone executives. By 8 o'clock that morning, my kitchen had been transformed into a federal evidence processing center. Detective Mitchell and 2 FBI financial analysts were cataloging every document Margaret Chen and I had gathered over the past week. The scope of Michael's criminal activity was even broader than I had realized. Your son has been involved in a systematic scheme to manipulate stock prices, steal proprietary information, and defraud investors. Detective Mitchell explained as she reviewed bank records. The Blackstone connection makes this a RICO case, organized criminal enterprise. The irony was perfect. Michael had spent months planning to destroy me legally and financially. Instead, his own illegal activities had made him the target of a federal investigation that would destroy him completely. At 10 o'clock, Thomas Henderson arrived with the final legal documents for the Hartwell acquisition. But he also brought news that made this day even more satisfying. Caroline, I just received a call from Blackstone's attorney. They're withdrawing all legal challenges to your share ownership and the emergency injunction. Apparently, they have more pressing legal concerns to deal with. The federal investigation? Exactly. And there's more. Michael's attorney contacted me an hour ago requesting a meeting. It seems my client is now interested in negotiating a settlement rather than fighting this in court. The Hartwell closing took place in the conference room of Thomas's law firm at 2 o'clock that afternoon. David Hartwell and his legal team had prepared everything for the smoothest transaction possible. $320 million would be transferred to my accounts within 24 hours, and I would begin my 5-year consulting contract with guaranteed annual compensation of $1 million plus equity participation. But the most satisfying moment came at 3:15, when Thomas's secretary announced that Michael was in the lobby requesting an emergency meeting with his mother. Should I tell him you're unavailable? Thomas asked. No, let him come up. I want him to see exactly what his betrayal has accomplished. Michael walked into that conference room looking like a man who had aged 10 years in the past week. His expensive suit couldn't hide the exhaustion in his eyes or the defeat in his posture. He glanced at the Hartwell executives, then at the signed acquisition documents spread across the table. Mom, we need to talk. Michael, meet David Hartwell and his acquisition team. We've just completed the sale of Prescott Industries for $320 million, $50 million more than your Blackstone deal would have provided. Michael's face went white. Mom, please, the FBI, they're saying I could go to prison for 15 years. My attorney says the only way to reduce the charges is if you agree not to pursue civil damages, and if you provide testimony that I was acting under extreme financial pressure. I looked at my son, this man who had called me too old and incompetent just 1 week earlier, and felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Michael, you made your choices. You chose to steal from me. You chose to sell confidential client information. You chose to manipulate stock prices for personal gain. You chose to betray the woman who sacrificed everything to give you opportunities. Mom, I was desperate. The debts, the pressure. I made mistakes, but I never meant to hurt you personally. You didn't mean to hurt me personally? I stood up and walked around the conference table until I was standing directly in front of him. You humiliated me in front of people I've worked with for decades. You tried to steal my life's work. You attempted to destroy everything I built with my own hands. How exactly did you think that wouldn't hurt me personally? Michael was crying now, something I hadn't seen since he was a child. Mom, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Please, you're the only person who can help me now. David Hartwell and his team were tactfully reviewing documents, pretending not to witness this family drama, but I could see the discomfort in their faces. Michael, I will provide truthful testimony about your financial situation if the FBI requests it, but I will not lie for you, and I will not minimize the severity of what you did to me and this company. That's all I can ask for. No, it's not. I walked back to my chair and sat down. There's something else you need to understand. Your actions didn't just hurt me. They hurt every employee of this company who trusted you. Patricia Williams has been having panic attacks because she thought she would lose her job. Robert Chen has been working 18-hour days trying to reassure clients. Jennifer has been crying in the bathroom because she thought the company was collapsing. Michael looked around the room, finally beginning to comprehend the full scope of the damage he had caused. But here's what you really need to understand, son. I didn't fight back against you to be vindictive. I fought back because 32 years of my life's work deserved better than being sold for parts to pay your gambling debts and finance your lifestyle. I picked up the final Hartwell contract and showed it to him. This acquisition preserves every job, honors every client relationship, and provides security for everyone who helped build this company. That's the difference between your approach and mine. You were willing to destroy everything for personal gain. I was willing to fight for everything to preserve what we built together. Michael nodded, unable to speak. Your betrayal taught me something important, Michael. It taught me that I'm stronger than I thought I was. It taught me that 32 years of business experience gives me advantages that younger people can't imagine. And it taught me that sometimes the people closest to you can become your greatest enemies. As Michael prepared to leave, he turned back one final time. Mom, do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? I considered his question carefully. Michael, forgiveness is about letting go of anger that hurts you more than it hurts the person who wronged you. I'll work on forgiveness because it's better for my health. But forgetting? Trusting you again? Those are different things entirely. After Michael left, David Hartwell approached me. Mrs. Prescott, I have to say, I've been involved in dozens of acquisitions, but I've never seen anyone handle a family betrayal with such grace and strategic thinking. David, I learned a long time ago that the best revenge isn't emotional. It's succeeding so completely that your enemies realize they never should have underestimated you. That evening, I sat in my home office looking at the bank confirmation that $320 million had been deposited into my accounts. Michael's betrayal had inadvertently resulted in the most profitable business transaction of my entire career. But more than the money, I had proven something to myself that I had begun to doubt. That experience, wisdom, and strategic thinking could still triumph over youth and arrogance in the modern business world. The war was almost over, but there was still one final lesson Michael needed to learn. 3 weeks after the Hartwell acquisition closed, I received a phone call that would provide the perfect ending to Michael's corporate education. Detective Mitchell called with an update that was both expected and deeply satisfying. Mrs. Prescott, I wanted you to know that we've completed our investigation into Blackstone Consulting Group. The indictments will be unsealed tomorrow morning. Your son is facing 12 federal charges, including securities fraud, conspiracy, and theft of trade secrets. What kind of sentence is he looking at? With his cooperation and your testimony about his financial pressures, probably 5 to 7 years in federal prison. Without cooperation, he could face 15 to 20 years. But the call that truly surprised me came that same afternoon. David Hartwell phoned with news that would make Michael's downfall even more complete. Caroline, I have an interesting proposition. Blackstone is going into bankruptcy, and their client list is going to be auctioned off. Would you be interested in acquiring some of their accounts through Prescott Industries? The irony was exquisite. Blackstone, the company Michael had tried to sell us to, was now being dismantled, and I had the opportunity to acquire their most valuable assets at bankruptcy prices. How many clients are we talking about? 47 major corporate accounts, including some Fortune 500 companies. Combined annual revenue of approximately $80 million. The bankruptcy court is looking for a quick sale to preserve ongoing client relationships. Within 48 hours, I had structured a deal to acquire Blackstone's entire client portfolio for $35 million, less than half what those relationships were actually worth. The same company that Michael had conspired with to destroy Prescott Industries was now being absorbed by us at a fraction of its true value. But the moment that provided the deepest satisfaction came on a Thursday morning in November. I was in my new office at Hartwell Prescott Industries, reviewing integration plans for the Blackstone acquisition, when Jennifer announced that I had a visitor. Mrs. Prescott, there's a young woman here who says she's a reporter from Business Weekly magazine. She wants to interview you about the Prescott-Blackstone situation. The reporter, Jessica Chen, no relation to Robert, was in her late 20s, sharp, and clearly well prepared for our conversation. Mrs. Prescott, your story has become legendary in business circles. A 58-year-old CEO who was betrayed by her own son, fired from her own company, and then orchestrated one of the most brilliant corporate reversals in recent history. How does it feel to have turned your son's betrayal into the most profitable period of your career? I considered her question carefully. Jessica, what Michael did taught me something important about myself. For 32 years, I had been so focused on building and protecting what I had created that I had forgotten how good I was at the strategic thinking that built it in the first place. Do you think your son understood the magnitude of what he was attempting? Michael understood the financial aspects, but he completely misunderstood the human element. He thought he was dealing with a tired old woman who would quietly accept defeat. Instead, he awakened something in me that had been dormant, the same ruthless business instinct that built Prescott Industries from nothing. Jessica leaned forward. There are rumors that you're not finished with corporate acquisitions, that you're planning to build something even larger than the original Prescott Industries. I smiled. Let's just say that Michael's betrayal reminded me that I'm very good at this game. And now, with the resources from the Hartwell acquisition and the strategic opportunities from Blackstone's collapse, I have the chance to build something that makes my original company look small by comparison. That afternoon, I received a letter that provided the perfect punctuation to this entire experience. It was from Michael, written from the Federal Correctional Facility where he was serving his 7-year sentence. Mom, the letter began, I've had a lot of time to think about what I did and why I did it. I know that saying I'm sorry doesn't undo the damage, but I need you to know that I finally understand what I threw away. He went on to explain that federal prison had given him perspective on the magnitude of his betrayal, not just of me personally, but of everything we had built together over the years. I see now that you weren't holding the company back. You were protecting it from people like me who would destroy 32 years of work for short-term gain. I understand now that your old-fashioned methods weren't weakness, they were wisdom. But the paragraph that affected me most deeply came at the end of his letter. Mom, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I want you to know that in here, when people ask me about business, I tell them about my mother. I tell them about a woman who built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing, who survived every challenge the market threw at her, and who was smart enough to outmaneuver her own son when he tried to steal everything she had worked for. I tell them that Caroline Prescott is the smartest business person I've ever known, and I was too arrogant to learn from her when I had the chance. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. Michael was learning the lessons I had tried to teach him for years, but he was learning them in federal prison instead of in the boardroom where they could have made us both successful. 6 months later, Hartwell Prescott Industries completed the acquisition of 3 more consulting firms, creating the largest independent consulting company on the East Coast. Our annual revenue had grown to over $400 million, and I had been featured on the cover of Forbes magazine as Executive of the Year. During the Forbes interview, the reporter asked me what advice I would give to other business leaders facing family betrayal. Never underestimate the power of experience, I replied. Young people think that age makes you weak or irrelevant, but 30-plus years in business gives you something that youth can't provide: the wisdom to see patterns, the patience to wait for the right moment, and the strategic thinking that comes from surviving every possible crisis. Do you think you'll ever work with your son again? Michael will be released from prison in 4 years. If he's learned the lessons that experience has tried to teach him, and if he's genuinely committed to rebuilding trust, then we might find a way to work together again. But he'll never again have the opportunity to betray the person who gave him everything. That evening, as I reviewed the quarterly reports that showed Hartwell Prescott Industries growing beyond my wildest expectations, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. Michael's betrayal had been the most painful experience of my professional life, but it had also been the catalyst for the most successful period of my career. Sometimes, the people who try to destroy you end up making you stronger than you ever imagined you could be. 2 years after Michael's conviction, I thought the corporate warfare was behind me. Hartwell Prescott Industries was thriving. Our client base had expanded to include international corporations, and I had successfully transitioned from being a betrayed mother to being recognized as one of the most formidable business leaders on the East Coast. Then I received a phone call that would reignite the conflict in ways I never anticipated. Mrs. Prescott, this is Attorney General Patricia Hawkins. I need to speak with you urgently about new developments in the Blackstone investigation. Attorney General Hawkins arrived at my office that same afternoon with FBI files that revealed a conspiracy far more extensive than anyone had realized. Michael's betrayal hadn't been an isolated act of desperation. It had been part of a systematic corporate espionage operation that involved dozens of companies and potentially hundreds of millions in fraudulent transactions. Caroline, your son wasn't just selling information to Blackstone. He was part of a network that was stealing proprietary data from consulting firms across the country and selling it to foreign competitors. The national security implications are staggering. As she opened classified files, I saw documents that made my blood run cold. Michael hadn't just betrayed me. He had betrayed American business interests to competitors in China and Russia, selling strategic information that could compromise entire industries. How long has this been going on? We believe the network has been operating for at least 5 years. Your son's cooperation has helped us identify other participants, but Caroline, there's something else. We have reason to believe that some of the people involved in this conspiracy are planning retaliation against you for exposing their operation. That evening, as I sat in my home office reviewing the classified materials Attorney General Hawkins had shared, I realized that Michael's original betrayal had been even worse than I had imagined. My own son had not only tried to steal my company, he had been selling American corporate secrets to foreign governments. But the phone call that came at 10 o'clock that night transformed my shock into cold fury. Caroline Prescott? The voice was unfamiliar, with a slight accent I couldn't identify. Yes, who is this? Someone who wants to make you an offer. Your son's testimony has caused significant problems for certain business associates. We're prepared to pay you $50 million to retract your cooperation with federal investigators. I sat up straighter in my chair. I beg your pardon? $50 million, transferred to any account you specify, in exchange for your public statement that you were mistaken about your son's activities and that you no longer wish to cooperate with the federal investigation. And if I refuse? Mrs. Prescott, you've built a very successful business. It would be unfortunate if something happened to interfere with that success. The line went dead, and I immediately called Detective Mitchell. Caroline, we've been expecting something like this, she said when I reported the call. The people Michael was working with have billions of dollars at stake. They're not going to let this investigation continue without fighting back. What kind of retaliation are we talking about? Everything from cyber attacks on your business systems to physical threats against you personally. We're going to provide protection. But Caroline, you need to understand that you're now a target in a case that involves national security. The next morning brought confirmation that the threat was real. When I arrived at the Hartwell Prescott offices, our entire computer network had been compromised. Every file, every client record, every financial document had been encrypted by ransomware that demanded $10 million for restoration. But what the attackers didn't realize was that I had been preparing for corporate warfare for 40 years. Our data was backed up in multiple secure locations, and within 6 hours we had restored full operations without paying a cent in ransom. The message, however, was clear. Michael's former associates were willing to destroy my business to protect their conspiracy. That afternoon, David Hartwell requested an emergency meeting. His usually calm demeanor was replaced by visible concern as he explained the pressure his company was facing. Caroline, we've received calls from 3 major clients threatening to terminate their contracts if we continue to be associated with the federal investigation. Someone is systematically contacting our business partners and spreading rumors about our stability and reliability. How much business are we talking about? Potentially $60 million in annual revenue. Caroline, I believe in what we're doing, but my board is starting to ask difficult questions about whether this investigation is worth the risk to our company. This was the moment I had been dreading. The point where standing up for justice might cost me the business success I had fought so hard to achieve. David, let me ask you a question. If we back down now, if we let these criminals intimidate us into silence, what happens the next time someone tries to destroy American businesses through espionage and fraud? I understand the principle, Caroline, but no buts. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the harbor. 40 years ago, I started a consulting business because I believed that intelligence and integrity could triumph over corruption and shortcuts. Michael's betrayal tested that belief. This conspiracy is testing it again. I turned back to face David. I'm not backing down. Not from my son, not from his criminal associates, and not from foreign governments who think they can steal American business secrets without consequences. What if it costs us everything we've built? Then we'll build it again. But if we surrender to these threats, we'll never be able to look at ourselves in the mirror again. That evening, alone in my office, I called Attorney General Hawkins with a decision that would either vindicate everything I had fought for or destroy everything I had achieved. Patricia, I want to expand my cooperation with the investigation. I want to provide testimony not just about Michael's activities, but about everyone involved in this conspiracy. And I want to do it publicly. Caroline, that's incredibly brave, but it's also incredibly dangerous. These people have billions of dollars and government connections. They can make your life very difficult. They already have. But you know what I learned from my son's betrayal? When someone tries to destroy you, the worst thing you can do is make it easy for them. What are you proposing? I'm proposing that we hold a press conference next week. I'll tell the complete story of how my son's betrayal led us to uncover one of the largest corporate espionage operations in American history. Let these conspirators explain to the American people why they think they can threaten someone for cooperating with law enforcement. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. Caroline, are you absolutely certain about this? Once we go public, there's no going back. Patricia, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. It's time to show these criminals that Caroline Prescott doesn't back down from a fight. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Michael's betrayal had prepared me for this moment in ways I never could have anticipated. He had taught me that sometimes the people closest to you can become your enemies. Now his criminal associates were about to learn that making an enemy of Caroline Prescott was the biggest mistake they could possibly make. The real war was just beginning. The press conference was scheduled for Tuesday morning at the Federal Building downtown, but the events that would make it legendary began the weekend before. On Saturday evening, I received a call from Detective Mitchell that would transform this from a simple testimony into the most significant corporate espionage exposure in decades. Caroline, we've had a breakthrough. Michael provided us with encrypted files that he kept as insurance against his co-conspirators. Our cyber forensics team just cracked the encryption, and what we found changes everything. What kind of everything? The conspiracy involves 43 American companies, 16 foreign corporations, and at least 6 current members of Congress who were receiving payments for providing advance notice of regulatory changes. This isn't just corporate espionage. This is systematic economic warfare against the United States. Sunday morning brought visitors I hadn't expected. Thomas Henderson arrived at my house with 2 men in expensive suits who introduced themselves as representatives of the companies involved in the conspiracy. Mrs. Prescott, the older man began, my name is Richard Blackwood. I represent a consortium of businesses that have been adversely affected by the federal investigation your cooperation has triggered. Adversely affected by having their crimes exposed, you mean? Mrs. Prescott, let's be realistic. This investigation is going to destroy hundreds of legitimate businesses and eliminate thousands of jobs. Surely we can find a mutually beneficial resolution that doesn't require such dramatic public exposure. The younger man opened a briefcase and placed a single document on my kitchen table. $100 million, Mrs. Prescott. Tax-free, transferred to any account you specify, anywhere in the world. All you have to do is announce that you've reconsidered your cooperation with federal investigators. I looked at the document. A wire transfer authorization for more money than I had ever seen in my life. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what that money could buy. Complete financial security, the ability to retire anywhere in the world, freedom from the stress and danger of fighting this conspiracy. Then I thought about Michael, sitting in federal prison, finally learning the lessons about integrity that I had tried to teach him for decades. I thought about the thousands of American businesses that had been victimized by this espionage network. I thought about the employees whose jobs had been eliminated because foreign competitors had stolen their company's trade secrets. Gentlemen, I said, standing up from my kitchen table, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. 42 years ago, I started a consulting business with $5,000 and a belief that hard work and honesty could compete with corruption and crime. Every success I've achieved, every dollar I've earned, every relationship I've built has been based on that principle. I walked to my front door and opened it. My son tried to destroy me by betraying everything I had worked for. Now you're trying to destroy me by tempting me to betray everything I believe in. The answer is no. Richard Blackwood's face hardened. Mrs. Prescott, you're making a very dangerous mistake. The people we represent have resources and connections that you can't imagine. They can destroy your business, your reputation, your personal safety. Get out of my house. Caroline, get out of my house. After they left, Thomas remained behind, his face pale with concern. Caroline, these people aren't bluffing. They have the power to make your life very difficult. Thomas, do you remember what I told you when Michael first betrayed me? I said he was about to learn what happens when you try to steal from Caroline Prescott. Well, these criminals are about to learn what happens when you try to intimidate Caroline Prescott. Monday morning arrived with news that proved my decision had been correct. Attorney General Hawkins called with an update that vindicated everything I had fought for. Caroline, Michael's encrypted files have led us to bank records showing over $2 billion in payments to American executives for stealing trade secrets. We've identified the specific foreign intelligence services that were purchasing the information, and we've documented how this espionage network has cost American businesses an estimated $50 billion in lost competitive advantages. How many arrests are we talking about? 87 people across 12 states, including 3 sitting congressmen, 2 federal judges, and the CEOs of companies you've probably heard of. This is going to be the largest economic espionage prosecution in American history. And Michael's cooperation made this possible? Your son's testimony and the evidence he preserved will put some very dangerous people in prison for decades. Caroline, I want you to know that his cooperation has been extraordinary. He's risked his own safety to help us expose this conspiracy. That afternoon, I received a letter from Michael that would bring our story full circle. It had been written the previous week, before he knew about the breakthrough in the investigation. Mom, I know you're about to testify publicly about the conspiracy I got involved in. I want you to know that I'm terrified, not for myself, but for you. These people are capable of things that would horrify you, and I'm responsible for putting you in their crosshairs. The letter went on to explain details about the conspiracy that even the FBI hadn't yet discovered. Michael described meetings where foreign intelligence officers discussed specific plans to destroy American consulting firms that couldn't be co-opted or corrupted. He named individuals who had been eliminated when they threatened to expose the network. But Mom, I also want you to know that watching you fight back against impossible odds has reminded me of why I used to be so proud to be your son. In here, when I tell people about Caroline Prescott, I don't talk about the woman I betrayed. I talk about the woman who was strong enough to turn my betrayal into the catalyst for exposing one of the most dangerous threats to American business in decades. The final paragraph of his letter moved me to tears. I know I may never earn your forgiveness, and I know I'll never have another chance to work with you or learn from you. But I want you to know that everything I'm doing to help this investigation is my way of trying to honor the lessons you spent 30 years trying to teach me. You always said that integrity was more important than profit, that protecting others was more important than protecting yourself, and that standing up for what's right was more important than taking the easy path. I'm finally learning what those words really mean. Tuesday morning's press conference took place in the main hall of the federal building, with representatives from every major news network in attendance. Attorney General Hawkins introduced me as the woman whose courage in the face of family betrayal led to the discovery of the most extensive corporate espionage network in American history. Standing at that podium, looking out at dozens of cameras and reporters, I felt the weight of everything that had brought me to this moment. Michael's betrayal, the threats from his criminal associates, the attempts to bribe and intimidate me, all of it had led to this opportunity to expose a conspiracy that had been damaging American businesses for years. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my name is Caroline Prescott, and 2 years ago, my own son betrayed me and tried to steal the company I had spent 32 years building. Today, I'm here to tell you how that personal betrayal led us to uncover a criminal conspiracy that has stolen billions of dollars from American businesses and compromised our national economic security. For the next 45 minutes, I told the complete story. I described Michael's attempt to sell Prescott Industries to Blackstone, his involvement in corporate espionage, and the systematic theft of trade secrets from dozens of American companies. I explained how his cooperation with federal investigators had led to the identification of a network that included foreign intelligence services, corrupt American executives, and government officials who had sold out their own country for personal profit. But the moment that defined the entire press conference came when a reporter asked me about the personal cost of this fight. "Mrs. Prescott, you've been threatened, your business has been attacked, and you've been offered enormous sums of money to stop cooperating with investigators. Why didn't you just take the money and walk away?" I looked directly into the camera that was broadcasting live to millions of Americans. Because 42 years ago, I started a business based on the belief that hard work and integrity could compete with corruption and crime. My son's betrayal tested that belief. This conspiracy has tested it again. And every time, I've discovered that the principles I learned from my parents and tried to teach my son are stronger than the greed and corruption that threatens to destroy them. What would you say to other business leaders who might be facing similar pressures? I would tell them what I learned from fighting back against my son's betrayal and what I'm learning from fighting back against this conspiracy. When someone tries to destroy you, the worst thing you can do is make it easy for them. When someone tries to intimidate you into silence, the most powerful thing you can do is tell your story louder than they ever imagined. Do you have any regrets about the path you've chosen? I paused, thinking about Michael in his federal prison cell, about the threats I continued to receive, about the business relationships that had been damaged by my decision to cooperate with investigators. I regret that my son made choices that led him to prison. I regret that American businesses have been victimized by this espionage for so many years. I regret that it took a personal betrayal to expose this conspiracy. But I don't regret fighting back. I don't regret refusing to be intimidated. And I don't regret proving that a 58-year-old woman who was betrayed by her own son could bring down a criminal network that thought it was untouchable. The questions continued for another 30 minutes, but the story was already being broadcast around the world. Within hours, international news organizations were calling it the corporate espionage case of the century and the testimony that brought down a criminal empire. That evening, as I sat in my office reviewing the overwhelming media response to the press conference, I received one final call that would complete the circle of justice I had been seeking for 2 years. "Caroline, this is Warden Matthews from the Federal Correctional Facility. Your son asked me to call you with a message." "What message?" "He said to tell you that watching your press conference today was the proudest moment of his life. He said that for the first time in years, he felt worthy of being Caroline Prescott's son." 6 months later, the trials began. 87 defendants faced charges ranging from corporate espionage to treason. Michael's cooperation resulted in a reduced sentence of 3 years, with credit for time served. The conspiracy he had helped expose resulted in the recovery of over $15 billion in stolen intellectual property and the dismantling of espionage networks that had been operating for over a decade. Hartwell Prescott Industries not only survived the investigation, it thrived. Companies around the world sought our services to protect their own operations from similar espionage threats. Our annual revenue grew to over $800 million, making us one of the largest consulting firms in the world. But the victory that meant the most to me came in a letter from Michael, written after the final convictions were announced. "Mom, I know I can never undo the damage I caused, but I want you to know that your courage in exposing this conspiracy has saved thousands of American jobs and billions of dollars in economic losses. You turned my betrayal into something that protected our entire country. That's the kind of leader I always knew you were, and the kind of person I hope I can become when I'm released." As I finished reading his letter, I realized that the greatest justice of all wasn't the prison sentences or the recovered money or the business success. The greatest justice was that Michael had finally learned the lessons I had spent 30 years trying to teach him about integrity, courage, and standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. Sometimes the people who betray you end up teaching you just how strong you really are. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, they learn those lessons too. 5 years have passed since that press conference changed everything. As I sit in my office at Hartwell Prescott Industries, now valued at over $1 billion, I often reflect on the journey that transformed a personal betrayal into a testament to the power of resilience and integrity. This morning brought news that would have seemed impossible during those dark days when Michael first fired me from my own company. The President of the United States awarded me the Presidential Medal of Freedom for exceptional courage in exposing corporate espionage that threatened American economic security. The ceremony is scheduled for next month, and Michael, released early for his extraordinary cooperation, will be there to see his mother receive the nation's highest civilian honor. The transformation in my relationship with Michael has been the most unexpected aspect of this entire experience. 2 weeks after his release from federal prison, he came to my house with a proposal that initially shocked me and ultimately moved me to tears. "Mom, I want to work for you again," he said, sitting in the same kitchen where he had once dismissed me as too old for business. "Not as an executive, not as your heir apparent, but as someone who understands what it means to rebuild trust one day at a time. Michael, you understand that it would take years to prove that you've truly changed? I understand that it might take decades. But Mom, prison taught me something that Harvard Business School never could. The difference between being smart and being wise. You're the wisest person I know, and I want to learn from you the way I should have been learning all along." He started in our mailroom, processing correspondence and learning our business operations from the ground up. Employees who had witnessed his arrogance 5 years earlier watched in amazement as Michael Prescott quietly, humbly, methodically earned their respect through consistent hard work and genuine remorse for his past actions. Today, Michael serves as our Director of Corporate Ethics and Compliance, a position he created to ensure that no company we work with ever faces the kind of espionage threats that nearly destroyed us. His personal experience with corporate crime has made him one of the most effective compliance officers in the consulting industry. But the conversation that truly healed our relationship took place 6 months ago during a quiet dinner at my home. "Mom, I need to ask you something that's been troubling me for years," Michael said, setting down his wine glass with the same careful precision he now brings to everything he does. "What is it? Do you think you can ever truly forgive me for what I did to you?" I looked at this man who had grown from an arrogant young executive into someone I genuinely respected, and I realized that forgiveness had been happening gradually, without my even noticing it. "Michael, forgiveness isn't a single moment, it's a process. Every day that you show me through your actions that you understand the magnitude of what you did wrong, every day that you prove your commitment to rebuilding what was broken, is another step in that process." And where are we in that process? We're at the point where I can say that I'm proud of the man you've become, even though I'll never forget the man you used to be. The impact of our story has extended far beyond our family and our business. Harvard Business School now uses the Prescott case study to teach courses on corporate governance, family business dynamics, and crisis management. I've been invited to speak at conferences around the world about the intersection of personal betrayal and professional resilience. But the speaking engagement that meant the most to me took place last month at a women's leadership conference in Chicago. After my presentation, a woman in her early 60s approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Prescott, my daughter-in-law has been trying to force me out of the restaurant chain my husband and I built over 30 years. She says I'm too old to understand modern business practices, and she's convinced my son that they need to buy out my shares to modernize the operation. What are you planning to do? Before hearing your story, I was planning to sell and retire quietly. Now, I'm planning to fight. If Caroline Prescott could turn her son's betrayal into a billion-dollar business and a Presidential Medal of Freedom, maybe there's hope for the rest of us who've been underestimated." Stories like this reach me regularly now. The Caroline Prescott Foundation for Business Integrity receives hundreds of letters each month from people who've been betrayed by family members, business partners, or colleagues, and who've found the courage to fight back after learning about our experience. The foundation, which Michael helps manage, has provided legal support for over 200 cases of family business betrayal, corporate espionage, and age discrimination in the workplace. We've recovered over $50 million for victims of corporate crime. And more importantly, we've helped establish legal precedents that protect older business leaders from being forced out of companies they built. This afternoon brought a call that reminded me why this work remains so important. Detective Mitchell, now promoted to head the FBI's Corporate Crime Division, called with an update on a case that traces its origins to our original investigation. Caroline, remember those congressional corruption charges that grew out of Michael's testimony? The final conviction was announced this morning. Senator Richard Blackstone, the brother of the man who tried to bribe you 5 years ago, was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for selling classified information to foreign governments. How many people have been convicted in cases connected to our investigation? 143 individuals across 15 countries. The espionage network that Michael helped us expose was even larger than we initially realized. Your refusal to be intimidated literally changed the course of American economic security. This evening, as I prepared to leave the office, I walked past the conference room where Michael had fired me 5 years ago. The mahogany table is the same, but everything else has changed. The walls are now covered with awards recognizing Hartwell Prescott Industries' contributions to corporate integrity, international business ethics, and economic security. But the item that brings me the most satisfaction isn't an award or a recognition. It's a framed letter from a client, Continental Manufacturing, written after the espionage trials concluded. Dear Mrs. Prescott, we want you to know that our decision to remain with your company during the most difficult period of your investigation was the best business decision we've made in 20 years. Your courage in fighting corruption, even when it threatened everything you had built, demonstrated the kind of integrity that every business leader should aspire to achieve. We are proud to work with Caroline Prescott, and we are proud to support a company that proves that doing the right thing is also the smart thing. As I drove home tonight, I passed the building where I started Prescott Industries 47 years ago with $5,000 and a belief that hard work and integrity could compete with corruption and shortcuts. That belief has been tested more severely than I ever imagined it would be, but it has never been broken. The woman who was betrayed by her own son and fired from her own company has become the woman who exposed one of the largest criminal conspiracies in American history, built one of the most successful consulting firms in the world, and proved that experience and wisdom are still the most powerful weapons in the business world. Michael's betrayal taught me something I never expected to learn at age 58, that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can become the catalyst for the best thing you'll ever accomplish. Tomorrow morning, I'll wake up as the chairman and CEO of a billion-dollar company, the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and the mother of a son who finally understands the lessons I spent 30 years trying to teach him. But most importantly, I'll wake up as Caroline Prescott, a woman who proved that when someone tries to destroy you because they think you're too old, too weak, or too trusting, the most powerful response is to show them exactly how wrong they are. The legacy I'm leaving isn't just a successful business or a decorated career. It's the proof that integrity, courage, and strategic thinking can triumph over betrayal, corruption, and intimidation at any age. And that legacy will long outlive the people who once thought Caroline Prescott was finished. Because I'm not finished. I'm just getting started.